sun was just rising over the Savo National Park, spreading gold across the endless plains. The wind moved slowly, brushing through the tall acacia trees, carrying the smell of dust, grass, and morning dew. It was another ordinary dawn for Ranger Malik Njoroj, a man who had seen the wild in every shape and shadow. He started his patrol in the reserve southern range, his jeep rolling gently over the uneven dirt track. Birds were waking, filling the air with melody. Somewhere in the distance, a herd of impalas leapt through the haze. For a moment, Malik allowed himself to breathe, to admire the fragile peace that came before the heat. But that peace shattered with a sound that froze his blood. A deep, trembling trumpet, long broken, almost mournful. Malik hit the brakes, squinting ahead. Through the golden light, a massive figure appeared in the middle of the road, an elephant, old and scarred, standing motionless. Its ears hung low. Its trunk touched the ground, trembling. Malik raised his binoculars. "This isn't normal," he muttered. The elephant's head drooped to one side. It seemed weak, but its eyes, those enormous, dark eyes, were filled with something more than pain. They were filled with sorrow. "Looks like she's dying," whispered his colleague Amos from the passenger seat. Malik didn't respond. Something about the elephant's stance made him uneasy. She wasn't collapsing. She wasn't retreating. She was waiting. Then, as the engine idled, the elephant did something that made Malik's heart stop. She stepped forward and blocked the jeep completely. Then, with a strained motion, she raised her trunk and slammed it down against the earth. Once, twice, a third time. Each strike echoed like a heartbeat. Malik could feel the vibration through the ground. "She's warning us," Amos said, readying his rifle. "No," Malik whispered, eyes narrowing. "She's calling us." The elephant's trunk reached forward, not to attack but to touch. It brushed the edge of the jeep, hood gently, then lingered there like a plea for attention. Her breathing was ragged now. Foam streaked her mouth. Her ribs rose and fell like bellows. Malik felt his chest tighten. He'd seen hundreds of elephants in distress before, victims of snares, poachers, or drought, but this one was different. There was a desperate intelligence in her gaze. "Wait here," Malik said, stepping out slowly. Dust lifted around his boots as he approached. The elephant didn't move away. She lowered her trunk, almost bowing her head. Malik stopped a few meters short, his eyes locked on hers. "What are you trying to tell me?" he whispered. The animal let out a low rumble that shook the air. Then she turned, slowly, painfully, and began to limp away from the road, pausing every few steps to look back at him. "She wants us to follow," Malik breathed. Amos frowned. "Follow an elephant into the bush? Malik, are you mad?" "Maybe," Malik said softly, climbing back into the jeep. "But I've seen that look before. She's not lost. She's leading us." They followed. The jeep crawled behind her through narrow tracks lined with thick brush and dry grass. The elephant limped but never stopped. She would walk a few paces, glance back to ensure the jeep followed, and continue forward again. Minutes turned to half an hour. The morning sun climbed higher, setting the savanna ablaze with light. Malik wiped sweat from his forehead as the tires bounced over roots and stones. "Where are you taking us, old girl?" he murmured. Suddenly she stopped. The path opened into a shallow ravine surrounded by thorn trees and red mud. Malik killed the engine. The only sound was the faint buzzing of insects and the raspy breathing of the elephant. Then he saw it. At the base of the ravine, half buried in dry earth, something small twitched weakly. Malik's heart jumped. It was a baby elephant trapped between boulders, one leg twisted under its body. Its tiny trunk reached out feebly, searching for air. Amos gasped, "Oh my God!" The mother turned toward them and let out a single, guttural roar, not of rage but of anguish. She swung her trunk toward the calf, then back toward Malik, pleading. Malik understood. She wasn't blocking the road because she was dying. She was begging for help. He jumped out of the jeep and ran forward. The mud sucked at his boots. Heat burned the back of his neck. The calf's eyes were barely open, its skin caked with dried clay. Malik knelt, touching its trunk. It moved faintly, still alive. "We need ropes, shovels, everything," he shouted. Amos scrambled to the jeep, grabbing their equipment. The mother watched, packing the edge of the ravine. Her cries grew louder, echoing across the plain. Each sound was a mix of hope and terror. As Malik tied a rope around the calf's body, he glanced up. The elephant had lowered her head again. Her trunk curled toward her chest like she was praying. It hit him like lightning. This wasn't just an animal instinct. It was love. The midday sun hung like fire over the savanna. The air shimmered, heavy with heat. Malik's shirt clung to his skin as he worked knee-deep in the muddy ravine, his hands slick with dirt and sweat. The calf's breathing was faint, its tiny chest barely rising. Its left leg was trapped under a jagged slab of rock, and the mud around it had dried like concrete. Malik could feel the fragile heartbeat against his palm, slow, weakening. "We have to get her out now," he said hoarsely. Amos nodded, looping the rope under the calf's belly. "If we pull too hard, we'll break its leg." "Then we do it carefully," Malik replied. Above them, the mother elephant bellowed again, a deep, trembling cry that rolled through the ravine like thunder. Her ears flared wide. Her massive form loomed over them from the ridge. The ground vibrated with each of her anxious steps. "Easy, Mama, easy," Malik whispered, glancing up at her. Her tusks glinted under the harsh sun. Her eyes followed every move Malik made, her trunk hovering above the edge as if fighting the urge to reach down and grab her baby. Malik spoke softly to her, his voice low, rhythmic like a lullaby. "It's okay, we're here to help, just hold on, hold on." The elephant's rumble softened, deep and low. It was a sound Malik recognized, the sound of trust, fragile yet real. He and Amos dug tirelessly, their shovels striking the dry earth. The soil broke apart in chunks, clouds of dust rising with every swing. Malik's muscles screamed with exhaustion, but he refused to stop. Every second felt like a race against time and death. The mother moved closer to the edge, her enormous shadow stretching across the pit. She lifted her trunk again and let out a long, low trumpet. It was the same tone she'd made earlier, pleading, not commanding. Malik looked up, his throat tightening. "I hear you," he said. "I promise we'll bring her back." He crouched beside the calf once more, clearing the final layer of mud around the trapped leg. Amos positioned the rope and secured it to the jeep parked uphill. "On my count," Malik said, voice trembling with exhaustion. 1, 2, pull." The engine roared. The rope tightened, creaking under tension. The calf let out a weak cry, its first real sound. Malik steadied it, hands guiding its body as the rope lifted. The rock shifted, cracked. "Keep going," he yelled. The mother's cries grew frantic. Her massive trunk lifted high into the air, waving like a flag of anguish. The sound that followed could have split the sky, a roar so powerful that birds took flight from the nearby trees. Malik's heart pounded. His arms shook violently as he fought to guide the calf upward, keeping it stable. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with dirt. And then with one final pull, the rock gave way. The calf slid free, collapsing into Malik's arms. Its body was trembling, coated in mud, trunk limp. For a second he thought it was over. Then a breath. A faint trumpet escaped its tiny lungs. "She's alive," Amos shouted. The two rangers looked at each other, wide-eyed and speechless. Malik dropped to his knees, clutching the calf gently. Its skin was rough and warm beneath his hands, its pulse fragile but steady. Above them, the mother elephant went silent. She stared down at them for several seconds, her enormous ears twitching. Then she took one slow step forward, then another. "Malik, move," Amos cried. But Malik didn't. He just stood there, meeting her gaze. Trust me, he whispered. The elephant reached the bottom of the ravine. Her massive feet sank deep into the mud as she approached. Her trunk swung down toward the calf. Malik stepped back, heart hammering. She touched her baby first gently, then with rising urgency. The calf's trunk lifted weakly, brushing against her tusk. A low rumble filled the air, soft, melodic, full of emotion. Malik had heard many sounds in the wild, growls, roars, screams, but never this. This was different. It was a song, a mother's song. The calf tried to rise. Its legs wobbled, buckling beneath its tiny body. The mother nudged it, supporting it from the side with her trunk, guiding it upward. "Come on, little one," Malik murmured. "You can do it." The calf stumbled, slipped, then stood. The mother trumpeted once, short and sharp, a cry of triumph. The sound echoed across the plains, bouncing through the canyons and trees. Malik stepped back, overwhelmed. His vision blurred from the sweat and heat, but he could see clearly enough, the baby pressing against its mother's side, trembling but alive. Amos exhaled heavily, resting his hands on his knees. "You did it, brother." Malik shook his head. "No, she did." He looked up at the elephant. Her eyes, the same eyes that had once glared with desperation, now glowed with peace. The mother turned her head toward Malik, watching him for several seconds. Then, slowly, she lowered her massive frame onto her knees and bent her head down. For a moment, Malik thought she was collapsing again. But no, this was something else. She was bowing. His throat tightened. He'd seen lions beg, rhinos cry, and even buffaloes stand guard over their fallen young. But this gesture of pure, wordless gratitude was unlike anything he had ever witnessed. He whispered, "You're welcome, Mama." The elephant rose again, wrapping her trunk around the calf. Malik stepped back, watching them sway gently side by side. The sky had begun to darken. A soft breeze brushed across the plains. The storm clouds gathered in the far distance, rumbling like drums of the earth. Amos climbed into the jeep and looked back. What now? Malik stared at the pair, mother and baby standing together in the crimson light. "Now," he said softly, "we let her lead the way home." The elephant turned toward the west, her pace slow but steady. Each step left a deep imprint in the earth, like the footprints of faith itself. Malik followed behind in silence. As the wind swept through the tall grass, he looked once more at the great gray shape in the fading light, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood what it meant when the wild asked for help. The savanna glowed under a burning orange sky. The rescue had succeeded, but Malik's chest was tight with unease. The calf stood on shaky legs beside its mother, alive but far from safe. Its breathing remained shallow, and deep bruises marked its belly where the rocks had pressed against its fragile ribs. Malik crouched, scanning the calf's wounds. "We can't leave them here," he said quietly. "If the calf doesn't get fluids soon, it won't make it through the night." Amos frowned. "You want to load an elephant calf into the jeep?" "No," Malik replied, shaking his head. "We'll bring help to them." He reached for his radio. Static crackled. The signal was weak this far from the base camp. Malik shifted position, climbing to higher ground. "Base, this is Patrol 3. We've located an injured elephant calf near the western ravine. Repeat, injured calf and mother. We need medical transport immediately." Only faint static replied. The storm clouds rolling in from the east were already swallowing the horizon. "Try again," Amos said. Malik pressed the button harder. "Base, do you copy?" A distorted voice finally broke through. "Copy, Patrol 3, storm interference. Can you move to clear zone?" Malik looked around, no open ground for kilometers. The entire area was a maze of dry brush and thorn trees. The mother elephant shifted anxiously, sensing the coming storm. Her trunk brushed the calf's back in a gesture of comfort. "She knows," Malik murmured. "Animals always know." The air had changed thicker, electric. Thunder rumbled across the plains. A cold wind swept through the tall grass, bending it like waves. The scent of rain filled the air. Malik turned to Amos. "We're camping here tonight. We'll keep watch till the storm passes." Amos sighed but nodded. They parked the jeep close by, using it as partial shelter. Malik fetched the emergency blankets and a canister of water. The elephant mother stood guard over her baby, her immense frame still trembling with exhaustion. Every few minutes she lowered her trunk, caressing the calf's face, checking its breathing. Malik approached carefully. He poured a small amount of water into a shallow bowl and slid it closer to the calf. It hesitated, then sipped weakly. "That's it," Malik whispered. "Stay with us." The mother made a deep rumble, a vibration Malik could feel in his chest. It wasn't a warning, it was gratitude. As the first raindrops began to fall, Malik leaned against the jeep and stared at them, two gray silhouettes beneath the gathering storm. The scene felt almost biblical, a mother and child, fragile yet unyielding, standing against the wrath of nature. Lightning flashed across the horizon. The wind howled, bending the trees. Within minutes, the heavens opened. Sheets of rain poured down, hammering the ground, washing away the dust and sweat. Malik and Amos scrambled under the tarp they'd fastened to the side of the jeep. Water streamed through cracks, soaking their boots. "This is bad," Amos muttered. "If the ravine floods again." "I know," Malik cut him off, scanning the elephant pair. The mother had positioned herself like a shield, her body curved over the calf, taking the full force of the rain. She didn't flinch, didn't move. Malik's heart swelled with admiration. "She's protecting her child from the storm," he whispered. "Even now she won't rest." The rain continued for hours. The night deepened, filled with flashes of lightning and the trembling calls of nocturnal animals. Malik stayed awake, his eyes fixed on the silhouettes barely visible through the downpour. When dawn finally came, the world was transformed. The air was cool and the earth steamed beneath the newborn sunlight. Birds began to sing again, timidly at first, then louder. Malik stepped out, stretching his stiff limbs. The ground squelched under his boots. He walked toward the elephants, the mother still standing, her eyes half closed, the calf sleeping safely between her legs. She looked up at him, blinking slowly. Her trunk lifted, brushing lightly against his arm. The touch was brief, but in that single moment Malik felt an unspoken connection, stronger than words. "Morning, Mama," he said softly. "You did well." Amos emerged from behind the jeep, rubbing his eyes. "Radio, working again. Base says they're sending a truck with the vet team 2 hours out." Malik nodded. "Good, let's make sure they can find us." He climbed a nearby mound and fired a signal flare into the air. The red streak cut across the blue sky and vanished into the horizon. When he turned back, the calf was awake, wobbling but curious. It lifted its tiny trunk toward him, letting out a faint, squeaky trumpet. Malik smiled for the first time in days. But his smile faded when he noticed the mother's side heaving harder than before. Her breathing was labored. Deep lines ran across her flank. The exhaustion that had haunted her since yesterday was returning, faster, stronger. Malik's gut tightened. "Amos, she's not okay." The mother elephant tried to take a step and stumbled. Her trunk fell limply against the ground. The calf squealed, pressing against her side in panic. Malik rushed forward, shouting, "No, no, no, stay with me, big girl." The mother struggled to remain upright. Her legs trembled violently. Her entire body swayed as though she was fighting an invisible weight. Then she dropped onto her knees, her massive frame shaking the ground. "Malik," Amos shouted, "the vet team isn't here yet." "I know," Malik cried, kneeling beside her head. "Hold on, you've come too far to give up now." The elephant's eyes fluttered. Her breathing came in heavy bursts, every inhale a battle. Malik touched her trunk, feeling the coarse, scarred skin beneath his hand. "You saved her," he whispered, tears mixing with mud. "You can't stop now." The calf pressed its small body against its mother, trumpeting weakly. The sound tore through the silence like heartbreak made flesh. Malik's voice cracked. "Stay with her, she needs you." But the mother didn't move. Her eyes drifted closed. Her chest rose once twice, then went still. "No," Malik whispered. "No, please." He pressed his ear to her body. There was no sound. The sky above seemed to dim again, as if even the sun mourned. The calf let out another cry, high-pitched, trembling, echoing across the plains. Malik bowed his head, grief crashing through him like thunder. "You saved your child," he whispered. "You gave everything you had." And as the wind swept through the grass, he realized, sometimes, the wild doesn't take life cruelly. Sometimes it takes life gently, when the job is done. The wind had gone still. The rain-soaked earth shimmered under the first rays of morning. Malik stood motionless beside the fallen elephant, his heart heavy with silence. The mother who had fought death itself to save her child now lay still, her enormous body half covered in mud, her lifeless eyes reflecting the pale light of dawn. Beside her, the calf nuzzled her face again and again, as if begging her to wake up. Each cry tore through the savanna, raw, desperate, filled with grief only a child could know. Amos knelt, his voice barely a whisper. She waited until the storm passed. Malik nodded slowly, his throat burned. She waited until she knew her baby was safe. For several long minutes, neither man spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath, no birds, no wind, only the faint sobs of the calf echoing across the plains. Then from the distance came the low rumble of an approaching truck. The vet team had arrived. Dr. Njeri jumped down from the vehicle before it even stopped. Her eyes widened as she saw the scene, the fallen mother and her calf pressed close to her side. Malik stepped forward, his voice breaking. "We tried, we really tried." Njeri touched his shoulder gently. "You did enough," she said, "more than most ever could." The team worked quickly, administering fluids and checking the calf's vitals. "She's dehydrated but stable," Njeri confirmed. "If we move fast, she'll make it." The calf resisted being pulled away at first, trumpeting in protest, refusing to leave its mother. Malik crouched beside it, whispering softly. "She's watching you, little one. You've got to be strong now for her." The calf stared at him with eyes that shimmered with confusion and sadness. Then, with a small, trembling step, it allowed the team to guide it toward the transport truck. Malik turned one last time toward the mother. The light touched her skin, and for a fleeting moment she seemed almost alive, as though the earth itself was honoring her. He whispered, "Rest easy, Queen of the Plains." Hours later, as the truck rolled away toward the rescue center, Malik stood under a lone acacia tree. The savanna stretched endlessly before him, vast and eternal. He closed his eyes, listening, and for a moment he could swear he heard that deep, resonant rumble again. The voice of a mother, carried on the wind. Sunrise 6 months later. The rescue center was bustling with life. Birds fluttered across the sky, and the scent of fresh hay filled the air. Malik walked toward the large enclosure near the back, where a young elephant calf splashed happily in a pool of water. It was the same baby that had once been trapped in the ravine. She had grown stronger, her skin smooth and shining under the sun. "She's thriving," said Dr. Njeri, smiling. "We named her Nala." Malik smiled faintly. "Nala," he repeated, "the brave one." He watched as Nala lifted her trunk, spraying water into the air with a playful trumpet. But then something remarkable happened. She turned, walked to the fence, and reached her trunk toward him. Malik froze, tears welling in his eyes. Slowly, he raised his hand and touched the tip of her trunk, rough and warm. For a brief instant, it felt like her mother was there again, reaching through her child. "She remembers," Njeri whispered. Malik nodded, smiling through tears. "Of course she does. Love like that never dies." He looked toward the horizon, endless and golden, and felt a strange peace settle in his heart. Out here, life and death weren't enemies. They were dance partners, one always leading the other in circles across the timeless plains. And somewhere in the rustle of tall grass, he could almost hear that same low rumble again, the call of a mother elephant, echoing through eternity. Clapper board, if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share. Because somewhere, in every corner of the wild, another silent hero is fighting for life. And every story deserves to be heard.